On va voir qui.
Ben, le monsieur s'appelle Benjamin Hunting. C'est
Okay.
un Montréalais qui est, entre autres, auteur de bande dessinée, de comic book. C'est lui qui est derrière la série Code 45, dans le fond, qui se passe dans les... Ça
Ouais.
se passe dans le métro de Montréal.
Ah ouais, Code 45. OK.
Ouais, Code 45, là, c'est une belle petite œuvre. Ça a été dernièrement publié. Fait que là, les floppies, ça devient un petit peu plus difficile à les obtenir. Mais les trade paperback, tu sais, les recueils, ça c'est très accessible. Il n'en manque pas. Publié par Scout Comic, qui n'est pas n'importe quoi, ce qui est une belle compagnie de indie comic book. Genre de petit livre qui n'a pas de pub dedans. Quand tu commences à lire, là, les publicités sont toutes à la fin de leur livre.
Une distraction en chaque 4 pages, une grosse pub.
Ouais, mais on va on parle là-dessus. Là, comment péter mon momentum quand j'apprécie. Quand je n'apprécie pas la page, je m'en fous. Mais quand je suis dedans, puis je fais comme, oh my god, c'est bien bon. Puis là, hey, achète des Reebok.
Je te laisse présenter, Benoît, ton invité. Je vais le mettre à l'écran. Vas-y.
Ben ouais, mais juste aviser aussi les gens que ça va être une entrevue anglophone.
Yep.
Benjamin, dans le fond, il est capable de parler français quand il va chez Couche-Tard puis qu'il dit genre j'ai besoin de telle affaire, mais de là à structurer une conversation d'une dizaine, quinzaine, vingtaine de minutes, I figure it'd be a bit easier in English. And actually get answers.
Mais je peux structurer une conversation, mais c'est juste que quand tu écris comme un livre en anglais, puis toutes les idées dans ton tête pour ce livre sont en anglais, des fois, c'est plus facile de parler dans la langue d'origine parce que, tu sais, ça fait 4 ans que j'habite ce monde-là en anglais. Donc, c'est un peu pour ça que je veux le faire en anglais si c'est possible.
Oh, hey, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we start, I just want to know, do you want... tu veux-tu qu'on fasse comme Musique Plus, il fait un petit bout puis je traduis ou on le laisse aller puis on...
On va y aller comme ça.
Écoute,
comment?
Si tu me regardes en théorie, tu es censé être capable de comprendre l'anglais et le français.
Oh, non, c'est pas le problème, mais c'est pour les auditeurs.
Denis va se faire un plaisir de mettre des sous-titres plus tard.
OK, carrément, c'est beau. So here we go. Let's start the interview.
In any case, Benjamin, hello. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
I'm ecstatic. Thank you for accepting our invitation on Cinemaniax.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Had you heard about us before, or is this like your first time? Like,
no, I had. It's my first time hearing about it. Yeah.
Good job. Now it's your job to talk about it to everybody. I'm a fan of yours, Ben. Je le connais pas depuis super longtemps. Ça fait pas très longtemps que je suis au courant de Benjamin. But I rapidly fell in love the way he structures his stories. I fell in love in the fact that he's talking about us, people from Montreal. And right now, I kind of showed your comics a little bit earlier.
Okay.
And I wanted to kickstart this off with, last time we texted each other, you said whenever a comic actually gets printed, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's a little miracle.
I agree.
I'd love to know more about what you meant about that.
So I've been a professional writer for about 15 years, and most of that has been magazines, websites, that kind of thing. And when I decided that I wanted to do a comic of my own, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know the process. I didn't really know the industry. I didn't know the fact that any kind of comic book, it's a huge team effort. I mean, if you're a writer who can also draw, then you're half of the team is you. But if you're someone like me, who's a writer, you need to engage with an artist. You need to engage with a colorist. You need to engage with a letterer. You need to engage with a designer. And this is all before you publish. So just creating the product to get it to a printer, I had to become a team manager, which a project manager, which is not something that I do. Like, part of the reason why I'm a freelance writer is so I don't have to interface with other human beings, you know, like
I get that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But the fortunate thing for me is that my co-creators for Code 45 and for our current book, Dead Air, they're people that I've known a very long time. The designer I've known for 30 years. We grew up together. And her partner is the artist and co-creator, Joe Ng. And we all get along very well. And that's good in the sense that you're able to use that relationship and that communication that you have. Yeah, so you have Joe Ng, Josh Perez, who is the colorist, and Angela Hodge, who is the designer and letterer for this book. You're able to leverage that communication that you have with these people that you've known for a long time. But the other thing is, it's difficult to be in business with your friends.
Yeah,
because there's things
like
that. Yeah, it's just deadlines and figuring
They'll tell
out
you to fuck off, right?
Well, it's figuring out roles and stuff, because honestly, to me, the friendships are way more important than anything else. So you really have to balance that. But I think just the sheer amount of work that goes into creating a book. These comics are something that you could read a trade paperback in one sitting. You could sit down and in a couple of hours you can finish, you know, a 5 or 6 issue run. But that took 5 years to make, 4 years to make, 3 years to make, just the amount of time that goes into it. Because writing takes time, but art takes even more time. And staying with something for that long and staying on track and having a clear vision the whole time was a huge challenge.
I don't know if you're aware of who Jake Dion is. Are you familiar with him? He's an artist. He did Turbo Kid. He also
I've seen Turbo Kid. Yeah.
So I was doing a sit down, and he was talking, and he said people now read comics in about 15-20 minutes, right?
For sure.
But took almost 2 years, you know, to put together. And as soon as you're finished the number 1, you're like, okay, when's the number 2 coming out? And he's like, motherfucker, take a second look.
Well, when
go back and look at the drawings, you know how long that took?
And it's true, because there's so many different ways to read comics, right? Like, some people, they read the story exclusively. Like, they go from word balloon to word balloon. They follow the narrative, and the art is kind of in the background. And then there's people like when I hand a book to Joe, the first thing he does is look at the art, and he moves through the book and he's looking at the art. He's not reading it. He's not making any spoilers if he looks at the back, because to him, he wants to see the images, you know?
I'm the same. I'm the same way. So I'll skip through it because I like pictures and they're pretty. Yeah. And if I like what I see, then I'm like, okay, I'll read this then.
And I'll go in. The cool thing about that is it gives you multiple ways to experience the same thing. So if you do read it in 15 minutes, unlike I think a lot of different types of media, you can go back to a comic book and find different things in it that you didn't see the first time more easily than a TV show or a novel or something like that, especially a novel, where I think you have to take a lot of the context from the words as you're reading them. Whereas in a visual medium like television, film, or comic books, the visual aspect of that medium is also telling a story. And being able to see all those things at once doesn't always happen. Sometimes it takes like 2 or 3 read-throughs before you understand why a page was structured a certain way. Or sometimes I work, the way I work is I write a script and then I send it to Joe and we collaborate on it. But sometimes that like when we first started out, I would work more intensely with him on figuring out exactly what was going to be on the page. Okay. And this is because I was inexperienced. And at a certain point, Joe took me aside and he said, you need to trust me as the visual expert here, that I'm going to be able to present this in a way that's compelling, interesting, and that can be comprehended by the audience. And so once that happened, it helped the book in the sense that I didn't have to spend so much time literally scripting every single aspect of what was going to be seen. But I also was able to tag in Joe's expertise and have him come back with stuff that was even better than what I had pictured in my mind when I was writing out the words. So
you're bringing up, did you watch Mewtwo? Masters of the Universe?
No.
Okay, so Kevin Smith is like the creator behind that whole project.
Yeah.
And when he started, he was putting a lot of information for the fights. And the company that's behind the animation is like, dude, you got to stop that. Just write fighty. We'll take care of the rest.
Because otherwise it's like a straitjacket that you're putting on the animators or you're putting on the artists. Yeah.
And he's you called it right off. He's the visual specialist. He knows exactly how to maximize each and every one of them panels and make sure that your words come through. Because for me, it's a whole lot easier to be mesmerized by a picture than a word balloon.
Yes.
But I want that word balloon to really like pop out and grab my attention when I watch.
And
so,
it's the amazing thing about comics, and this is what makes it different from prose, is that I think that maybe when you first start writing comics as a writer, you rely so much on the words because that's what you know, and you don't leverage the advantage of the visual medium. One thing that I'm doing with the new book that we're working on together is trying to say less, because you can put the same emotion or the same action in a visual and have it be as effective or maybe even more effective. And having that harmony between the words and the images is what's important. And it's been a huge learning curve for me, especially as I came very late in life to comics. I didn't start seriously reading comics until I was 30, like in my early 30s.
You're new to the comic book game.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I loved to read stuff from Sunday morning newspapers. I read Calvin and Hobbes, Peanuts. Okay. I read a lot of Archie because I had a babysitter who had a ton of Archies. And so I loved to read. Yeah, they were accessible. And I loved to read as a kid. So I would read whatever was around. And I read Doonesbury, Bloom County, all of that stuff. My parents had a lot of that. Gary Larson's Far Side. But I didn't read things like X-Men. I didn't really read Batman. It just wasn't around. And I didn't have a huge interest in it. And then when I moved to Saint-Henri in maybe 2012, 2013, and there's a comic book store there called Crossover Comics. Yeah, it was within walking distance of my house. So I started to go over there, and I would talk to the owners, and I would be like, what should I be? I had some idea of what I wanted to read, but I'd be like, what should I be reading if I'm interested in this? And they kind of gave me a comic book education that I hadn't received to that point. I started out reading Alison Bechdel, books like Fun Home. Yeah, and Are You My Mother? I'm sorry?
A lot of indie books.
A lot of what, sorry?
A lot of indie books.
Yeah, that was the path I was sent down. Like the closest I got to the mainstream at that point was I was reading stuff like Watchmen and some of the classic 80s Batman, but a lot of the other stuff was I would read image books, but I wasn't really reading DC or Marvel, and I was discovering a lot of independent stories that I didn't know people were writing comics about. I just had no idea that this was an aspect of the comic book industry. And that
a lot of people were not educated, were not aware that existed more than either like Mickey Mouse, Goofy, Donald Duck things, superhero things, or Westerns. That most people thought that was what comics were. But there's like a depth so deep of newer indie comic book creators, from horror to funny, and like just for
any kind of story.
Penthouse just came out, right? So there's a market for those.
When I was lucky in a sense too. When I was a kid, my local library had a lot of Asterix and Obelix.
Yep.
And I read a lot of that. And I didn't know that in France, 1 in every 4 books sold is a comic book. Like it's totally mainstream there. So the stories that I was reading then, it's the same story. And a lot of Tintin as well. Adults were reading that in France, and I was like 12 years old. So there's such a difference in how it was being perceived in our culture versus across the ocean. And I didn't have that awareness until I was much older.
I tend to think that the last big indie comic book company is Scouts Comic. With, you publish them, Code 45 with Scout. How did that go out? How did that happen?
So Remember when I told you I didn't know anything about comic books when I started making my own comic books?
And I started slapping and laughing. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
I had no plan for Code 45 distribution, in the sense that I didn't know Kickstarter existed either. And we just made the book. The first, I think it was 2018, was when we got serious about we're doing the first issue, and we were going to do a black and white book because I didn't think I could afford color. And we were going to do the first issue and then start approaching publishers because we figured Joe has a strong track record in the industry. He's done Street Fighter, Transformers, a bunch of stuff for Udon. And he, with his reputation and having a completed book ready, we felt that that would enable publishers to take us seriously.
Yep.
So
and see what's what.
Exactly. So we started, once we had the issue finished, it was probably late November of that year, and it's right around Christmas, right? So you're thinking maybe this isn't the best time to be pitching comic book companies because everyone's on vacation or whatever. But we just started, I made a list of independent comic book publishers, and I read all of their submission guidelines, which are dramatically different for every publisher, put together a package for each of them. And then I had folders on my computer with all the different packages we sent out so I could track who responded to what. And we just started hitting up publishers. And
you're not doing Dead Air with Scott Comics.
No, we're not. I can get to that later if you want.
Yeah, well, I want to get to that. I want to get the Dead Air.
But yeah, we got most people did not respond. No response at all. Okay. And I was actually surprised I didn't even get anything from Drawn and Quarterly because they're based in Montreal. And I'm like, here's a book about Montreal that's really hardcore about Montreal and the metro and everything. And it's like, you know, I don't see a lot of these books. Like they're just not out there. And I
haven't. It's the first time.
And no response. So I was a little disappointed about that. But I heard back from a couple of others. One told us that, not to do too many spoilers about the book, but they said that they needed to have dragons in it right away. They're like, you know, like this is not interesting. It's at the very end of the book. I feel like you're going to lose your audience. And I'm like, okay, you don't get it. So we don't need to have this conversation. We don't
understand my vision.
Yeah. I mean, you want to be partnered with people who get what you're doing. Right. Exactly. We heard from Aftermath a little bit. We were talking with them, and then Scout, like literally right around Christmas time, sent us a message. They said, we love the book. We would love to publish it. It has to be color or we can't do it. And at that point, things got serious in terms of making a plan. You know, we had to figure out how we were going to create all of the rest of the issues and how we were going to pay for that, because I think it's very important for everyone who's involved in the book to be paid. Like Joe and Angela are my co-creators on my books, our books, but they also get paid their rate for as an artist, as a designer. The colorists get paid. Everyone gets paid before I do, you know? So that's not always the case in comic books, unfortunately. But in order to do that, I had initially planned to just pay it out of my own pocket. But comic books, when we were talking earlier about how they're a minor miracle, part of that is also how expensive they are to do. If you compare
how cheap they are to buy, which I think is a problem that's been created by the direct market, where you have an industry with two giant publishers that can print 100,000 copies at a very low rate. And then they set a price bar that every other publisher feels like they have to make in order to attract other readers. And that's very hard for smaller companies or individuals like us. So if you compare a comic book to a movie, it's really cheap. But if you compare a comic book to a novel, it's incredibly expensive. So, you know, you're looking at, for a single issue, it can be between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on how much you're paying, how much the art is costing you, how much the design is costing you, all of that. And that would be if you were paying a writer as well. So I'm not taking a salary on any of this. So just keeping that in mind, you know, we want to do 5 issues. That's $50,000 kind of, you know, and that doesn't include printing. So you can add probably another 10 onto that to print the whole series. So it's not a minor miracle.
That's
nothing minor about it.
That's where Kickstarter came in. Scout actually suggested that you know, they had other creators who had done crowdfunding and had worked well for them, and it was something that they were okay with, as long as the covers for Kickstarter were different from the covers that would go into retail. They wanted to have differentiation in terms of the books. So we ended up, I took a crash course on Kickstarter, and 30 days later, we launched our first campaign. And and then 2 weeks into that campaign, COVID happened. So we funded the book and it went fine, but it was a moment where we were like, what's going to happen now? You know, we have no idea what the future holds. But that was how
people lost their revenue at that point. So buying comics was very down the line.
It was down the line, and then the next year it was way up the line because everyone was stuck at home and they were looking for something to read. So it kind of had like a rebound effect. But Scout wanted us to have all of the issues completed before they went to market, because they don't know who we are. They don't know if we're capable of sustaining a narrative and capable of delivering an entire book. And so we had to prove that to them by actually completing it. I think that's pretty normal in terms of independent publishers.
I think, well, probably that they learned their lesson from being burnt. People who had great ideas, great artwork, and issue 4 took like 6 months too much to be able to produce.
And then you can't sell it. People have forgotten that your book exists.
Yeah.
And,
makes no sense. Yeah. I'd rather see like these awesome books and know that it's all complete. The process is done. You just need to publish it, get it out there to your LCS, local comic stores, and enjoy the ride afterwards. Did you feel it was a success?
So, yes, in the sense that we started with nothing and we ended up with a book that I think is meaningful and emotional and has something to say to the people who are reading it. It said what I wanted it to say. I feel like we didn't compromise anything. I feel like the art is fantastic, and we really were able to create a world for that book that I was happy with.
Sorry about the crunchy sound. I'm just gonna put up a couple of pictures because the artwork is really astounding, and there's so much to dig in. Right, this is the type of thing that gets me off. Right, being able, when you were saying you don't need to write that she's depressed, you can just show that she's depressed.
Yeah,
that she's going through stuff, that she doesn't really know what's going on. Why is this happening? So yeah, I really had a kick out of this. I started to read Dead Air. You sent me graciously a PDF with number 1. I started to reading that, and immediately I felt, oh, he's onto something.
Well, Joe is incredible in terms of just being able to create. Like, he goes into my brain and he pulls out the atmosphere and the settings that I have imagined. It's amazing.
Yep.
Steph, yep.
Yeah, I just want to ask before, because Benoit seems to go into Dead Air. And before we do that, because you were briefly introduced, can you tell us a bit more about Code 45, what it is, what's the character, what's the story and everything?
Of course.
He knows it. He's very passionate about it, clearly. But
he's the only one who read it.
And for the people who are watching, if they want to get into it, what set this book, comic book, apart from other, and who would be the targeted audience with a similar work?
Okay, sure. So with Code 45, I wanted to tell a story about the Montreal that I knew when I first moved to Montreal. I came to Montreal from Estrie in 1998, and obviously it's a very different city than it is now. And when I first came to the city, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know. I'm from the country. I don't really know how to live in a city. And I spent a lot of time like on the metro, just going different parts of the city, learning about the city, going to work, going to school and stuff. And I remember I had this idea in my head for years. And I'm not kidding when I say years, probably 10 years before I did anything with it, where I had this line that just said, there were dragons in the tunnels. And it was the idea that there were these creatures or hallucinations or supernatural occurrences inside the Montreal Metro tunnel. And it took me a really long time to figure out what I wanted to do with that idea. And by the early 20-teens, I realized that I could marry the experiences I had as a first timer in the city with kind of a supernatural element, and the experiences I had as a rave promoter in Montreal in the 2000s. I did that for about 10 years with some partners.
That's where all those raves.
Yeah, you see the gear in the background. I played metal guitar in a hard techno group, and we did a lot of promoting. And the thing that attracted me about that is two things. One, when you put that on the page, you can put all sorts of amazing colors and scenes and lights and design, because it's a very vivid environment to be at a rave. Yep. And the other thing is, when I was doing parties, there were parties that occurred. So Montreal has metro tunnels and stations that were never used. So they created stations. There's one, the most easily accessible one is on the other side of the Carry near Queen Mary. There's actually an outside access to it where you can go down. I don't know what they use it for now, but there's a full station there, and it was never put into service. So sometimes people would have raves in these stations. They would cut the locks and they would go in and you would have a party there. So I was like, that's kind of a fun way to introduce people to the idea of, you know, underground music that's actually under the ground. And then you introduce this element of people who, the main character, she starts working in the metro and she hears that people on the night shift, they're starting to, well, they're not starting to, but they say that they're seeing things in the stations at night in the tunnels, these dragon creatures, and they start using drugs to kind of medicate themselves so that they're not afraid to go to work. And over time, they can't tell whether what they're seeing is real or whether it's a hallucination from their habits. And so she gets drawn into this world, and she has to figure out whether it's real or not, and how it's attached to a secret from her own family that she has to discover and find out the truth there as well. So that's kind of how I tied everything together, all those ideas that have been swirling around in my head. So you can find Code 45 is everywhere right now. You can get it at comic book stores, but you can get it at Indigo or Amazon.
Or your own website.
Yeah, or my own website. If you go to code-45.com, there's a section about where you can buy it. But it's pretty much worldwide at this point, I think, because Simon & Schuster entered into a deal with Scout to publish the trade paperback.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be found. I had some from someone from Australia, someone from Germany. They were asking me where they could get it, and we were able to find them retail versions of it. So it is out there.
Not only is it available, but if you go down on scoutcomics.com,
let me put a lot of merch.
There's a lot of merch from buttons to hats to pillows.
They get all sorts of stuff.
They went all in.
The other thing I really wanted to do, I'm glad you asked that question, because the other thing I really wanted to do about with Code 45 was I wasn't seeing any comic books about Quebec in English, first of all. I mean, it seemed like to the rest of North America, our comic books and our comic book culture, or our culture period, was not being seen. And I know that we've been lucky in the last 15 years to have some really good movies come out of Quebec. And I mean, we've always had good movies here, but I mean movies that have found an audience outside of the province. And there are some really good comics that have been translated into English too, like Cab's book U-Town is fantastic. And she's from Montreal, and she does a really great job of portraying the city. But it upset me that every book that I read that was written by a Canadian was either set in Toronto or set in an American city. And I don't live in an American city. I can't relate to that. So I wanted to write about what I could relate to. And not only that, I wanted to evoke a period of Montreal that no longer existed. Kind of like love letter to like a city that's gone. A city that before the condos and before Griffintown and all these places. Like it's, you know, there's no memory of that place. There's no one, il n'y a pas d'archive qui préserve cet aspect de la ville. Puis, I thought that was unfortunate.
There is now.
There is now, yeah. And it was, we had to go back. Well, we had to go back in time to even find what the STCUM uniforms looked like back then, the different train paint schemes and stuff, because they change things all the time in subtle little ways. And so
wait a minute. So you're saying you took the time to actually do research, to be accurate with the timeline and everything. So it's not just an expansion from your head and everything.
No,
those are little details we don't know about. So that's nice.
The Montreal is this metro station system in Montreal is so different from the rest of North America, where you have all of the stations that were designed by individual artists, and they're all they all have their own personality. And if you go to New York or Chicago, it's not like that. You know, the L chain looks like the L train, and the New York City is just a nightmare no matter where you are underground. But Joe and we found there's some people who have done some really great photographic books, like a photographic history of the metro system, where they take fantastic photos of the different stations. And so we were able to pick the stations that were significant. We put it mostly on the Orange Line because it's one of the biggest lines. It has some of the most interesting stations to look at, and it kind of gave us a way to centralize the action. But just having Joe be able to see those stations as they are, and if you look in the book, you can tell what station you're looking at on a number of pages. It's obvious if you're from Montreal. So that was something I wanted it to be Montreal. I wanted that to be on the page. The buildings that she walks by, you know, les escaliers à l'extérieur des maisons, tout ça, so les petits in the neighborhoods.
That's all typical of Montreal.
Yeah,
it's a love letter. It's a love letter to Montreal.
And with Dead Air,
when it didn't suck, you know, before all that drama with, you know, les Grandes Oranges, puis le trafic qui finit plus. Puis
the Pont Champlain, the Tunnel, and Turcotte and all that.
It's a perfect little love letter to Montreal.
I mean, obviously Montreal was bad in some ways then too, but I think now it's more bad. Like, it's just
you know what I'm gonna wish.
Oblivious to it.
You know what I'm gonna wish for you, that your comic book becomes such a huge success. It will inspire people to come to Montreal just to take the metro and say, "Oh my God, that's the station from that issue. That's so amazing. I need to take a picture." And everybody else is gonna go, "What the fuck is going on?" I wish.
They're just gonna say another weirdo. Another weirdo. There you go.
I was that weirdo taking those pictures for our reference and stuff. You know,
because I'll be honest. I'm not a fan of the comic book medium. Okay, but I love.
Get him out.
Okay, bye.
No, but I love the work and everything. The whole thing, the whole interview. Thanks for asking him to come by. I love it. But I really love like all the work that goes behind it, and it's really fascinating and interesting. And the fact that you took the time to really make it about Montreal and the subway station. There's so many like possibilities of new event. Yeah, like treating like you came in '98. You know. The ice storm, so many things.
La crise d'Verglas 96.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask you a question now?
Yeah,
the one who speaks the most usually. I'm sorry. I just want to ask you something. As a kid, I've always dreamed of working in the comic book industry. What would you say to anyone who's a teenager, young adults, who, like you, would like to try and get into that industry? Because it's really hard. And second question, really quick, is are you like planning on using what you have printed already and use it as some sort of a portfolio to present for bigger companies like the big ones? Or
so that's a really great question. I'm not an expert. That's the first thing I need to say. There are a lot of people who have written a lot more books and had a lot more success in the business than I have. I'm also a person who even back in my music days, we were fiercely independent. We put out our own vinyl. We planned our own shows. We did our own tours. Based on what I see, the rates that comic book publishers, a publisher like Scout doesn't pay in advance. They don't pay a rate. It doesn't work like that. If you have a creator-owned book, you show up with your book, and then it's a revenue split, basically, based on sales down the line. If you're working for a major publisher like Marvel or DC, which again, I have never done, there are elements of that where sometimes you have a revenue split or Image. Some Image is kind of like the hybrid version of that. Sometimes you have a revenue stake in a character that you create, where if that character ends up in a movie or ends up being written by somebody else later on, you still are able to participate in profits that are associated with that. But historically, you're paid a rate for each page that you write or each page that you draw, and then that's it. You're done. So you get a day rate basically, or a page rate, or however you decide to work it out with the company. And those rates are not very good. There are people who are working for less than minimum wage because of the amount of time that it takes to draw a page. You can spend 8 hours on a page sometimes. Maybe you spend 2 hours the next day, but you average it out, and the amount of time versus the amount of income you're making, especially for artists, is not very good. So with the reason I'm happy you asked that is because it kind of segues into what we're doing with Dead Air, which is we're not looking for any type of publishing partner at this time. and we're using entirely Kickstarter and crowdfunding, which is how we started with Code 45 and getting that to the market, because there's much more money there in the sense of being able to pay the people who work on your book or your book together a living wage, which I think is really important. So if it's hard to know what to say to someone who's just getting started. I would think if you're an artist or you're a writer and you want to make your book, the best thing you can do is to do it. Actually create your book. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for an outside publisher to validate what you want to do, because the only way you get better at writing, and even for me as someone who's been writing professionally, outside of comics, I was lucky when I first started that I had a lot of clients where I could write tons and tons and tons of words and get it all out of my system, so that when people eventually started to pay attention, it was a lot better than when I started. It's like a muscle that you have to exercise, that you have to use in order for it to get stronger, whether you're an artist or whether you're a writer.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I just think you should start writing your comic, start drawing your comic, and then look for ways to publish it yourself or approach a publisher at that point. But don't wait thinking that you need to be hired by someone in order to either get started or to be validated in terms of what you're creating.
Yeah, you told us that you are like into the music industry also. Are you using the vibes and the inspiration of music to feel the vibes, right, to help you create the words?
1000%.
Yep.
1000. So like so much of the energy of Code 45 is based on the electronic music, the rave music, the dance music. It plays a very large element, and the culture as well in the book. And for Dead Air, which is set at it's set in Estrie at in a small town at a campus radio station, and it's split between the late 90s and then the 20 teens in Montreal. And it follows the life of the DJs who were there in the 90s at this small town playing all the music they loved. And, when you're at that age and your whole identity is kind of focused around the music that you listen to and the art that you appreciate and the media that you consume.
Still is.
Yeah. and then it contrasts that against, they're 15 years later when they're adults and they've kind of been beaten down by life, and they're, things are different. Things are not as vibrant. But linking those two things together is a mystery of something that happened to someone in that group of friends. And on both sides of this timeline, they're working to kind of solve the mystery and figure out what happened. And tying both of those things together is the idea that there's this technology in the world called DTalk, where one day a year you can talk to the dead. It's a text system, and one day a year everything lines up, and you go to these detox centers, and you can type to your grandfather or to your mother or whoever it is you want to talk to.
That is freaking awesome.
And
one day per year.
One day per year. But when we meet our characters, this technology has already been around for so long that no one really cares anymore. It's become just one more thing like virtual reality or video chat or Netflix. It's just, we take it for granted, and it's been totally normalized. And so that technology plays a key role in trying to figure out the mystery. So that was, I wanted to write about music again. I wanted to write about a time in music where I had used to be a DJ on college radio when I was 16, 17 to about 20. And I wanted to write about that, but I didn't want to do like a slice of life book, like pas un biographie, quelque chose de même, but something that had an outside narrative that I could kind of use the music as a setting, like I had done with Code 45 with the rave scene. And then I remember I was trying to figure out how to do that, and I was talking it through with my partner in the kitchen, and I was just walking back and forth in our house. And I remember I ran into the kitchen, and she was sitting down at the table, and I looked at her and I said, "What if you could talk to the dead?" And she was like, "That's it. You got it." And then everything just came from that. I was able to just expand on that idea for the book.
So where does that dragon come from then?
The dragon?
Because we were talking about a dragon earlier.
Code 45. The other one is Dead Air.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's funny because Joe has been putting in pieces of Code 45 into Dead Air. So if you look in the scenes, you see Easter eggs from the original book. It suggests that it's the same Montreal. It's the same universe. You see like sometimes characters, sometimes props that were in both of the books as well. And he's so good at it that I don't always remember. I was saying you can look at a page and then look at it again and you see new things. Sometimes I look at it like 5 days later and I'm like, wow, I did not notice that that was there. So he's quite talented at hiding things from me.
so he's putting Easter eggs inside the comics. So for the hardcore fan, they will be able to have something to look over. And this is
exactly,
nice. This is really nice.
What's the company that you're using now to physically publish your
the
Dead Air
printer that we're using?
No, not more of like the publisher, or
well,
I'm trying to get you to talk about Alpaca.
Oh yeah, so Studio Alpaca, we get the little alpaca here too. But
nice.
I just like alpacas. I think they're neat. And I recently moved to a place. I left Montreal last year because it was just too much at this point. Too much people, and really the city is not what it once was, and I prefer to kind of preserve that in my mind. But anyway, I moved to a place that has a bunch of alpaca farms. They're all around. And I think they're super cute. And I needed a name that was, c'est quelque chose que je peux dire en français puis en anglais puis tout le monde le comprend. Puis Studio Alpaca, c'est tout le monde connaît. Techniquement, c'est Alpaga, je pense. Mais quand même, we wanted to have a banner that we could release our comic books under, but we didn't want to make a business out of it because for various reasons, like we're all independent people. We all have our own tax situation, blah, blah, blah. Very boring. So we created like a comic book collective where we could use all of our strengths to help each other's projects. So we have, Angela Hodge designing, Joe Ng with his art, and then we have me writing and promoting with the Kickstarters and whatnot. And we actually, I don't think that's it.
No, really? Sorry, I'm sorry.
It might be. I'm not sure. I don't know if I registered. That might be the domain.
Alpaca.
But if you go to deadaircomic.com, that's where we have everything right now. But that might be the URL that I just haven't used yet. So I'm sorry to.
Maybe maybe they were.
You might know my business better than I do. Anyway, it was a way for us to organize all of our strengths and talents together and then use them together in a way that's not a formal business. So I was inspired. There's a group in Toronto called Hello Boyfriend, and they're kind of a collective as well that put out a lot of really cool comics. I'm trying to remember Jade's last name, but they just released a couple of really cool books that I was really into. Jade Armstrong. They have a book called Scout is Not a Band Kid, which came out a couple of years ago. And
not aware of it.
It's a great book. Totally, it's a little bit YA, but not really. I highly recommend it. But I was inspired. Sorry,
you're bringing me on my next question, which was: is there anybody out there that you'd love to work with? Because you have your own team, but is there anybody out there that's influenced you, or you're like, oh, I love so much how she's doing this. I'd love to collaborate with you.
I don't know about collaborate because it feels really presumptuous, There's some people that I've really enjoyed reading over the last little while. Daniel Warren Johnson's recent book, Do a Power Bomb. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
My God. That is good.
That's an incredible book.
It's right there. I love that book.
I was completely, I don't want to spoil it because I was completely unprepared for that book.
I got floored.
Yeah. That someone could do that.
On en parlera si jamais vous êtes intéressé. Ça parle de lutte, Do a Power Bomb.
Ouais. Okay, c'est comme du lutte, mais pas vraiment. Là. La lutte, c'est comme, it's like the raves in Code 45. It's like...
Yeah, it's the backdrop.
It's the backdrop to telling an incredibly powerful story. I really got into the Gem books that came out over the last 4 or 5 years. Gem and the Holograms, from the 80s.
Yeah.
So there's some really great, some of the art in Dead Air is inspired directly from the Gem art.
Yeah. Okay, I can see it now.
The colors, the vibrancy of how they portrayed performance of music, which I think is super difficult to do in the comic book medium.
When she dances and she's all
twisty. It's incredible. Like the color work alone is just it's amazing. So I was really inspired by seeing how that was depicted, and the stories are great. I just love how it's a story of like female friendship that's done in a way where it's not people being aggressive and fighting all the time, and it's supportive, and you don't see that a lot in mainstream media. So that was something that I really enjoyed reading recently as well.
I have, because I know that you have a time limit, but I had a couple of rapid questions.
Of course.
Just to pick your brain about stuff. Tell me this: would you rather have published one book that sells hundreds of thousands of millions of copies, or would you rather enjoy being able to write a lot of different books and a lot of different stories, but never really get that big sale pitch that everybody's dreaming about?
I think that you have to define success for yourself in anything that you do, or you'll be chasing it for your entire life. If you have an external definition of what it means to be successful at something that you enjoy doing, you'll never attain that. If you let other people define what success is, you will never, ever attain it. So for me, what I want to do is tell the stories that I have inside of me and have people read them. And that's pretty much as far as it goes. I'm lucky that I have a very comfortable lifestyle. Freelance writing has been very good to me, and as a business, and I get to work from my home. I get to be comfortable, and I get to use the fruits of that to tell the stories that I want to tell. And in a lot of ways, it frees me from the commercial aspect. Like, it's okay, however much it sells, however much of an audience it finds, and however long it takes to find that, just as long as I can keep telling those stories. And I also think it's really important for me to work with people that I want to work with, people that I like. If you can't be building something with your friends, then why do it at all?
That's what we're doing here. They're my buds.
Yeah,
right.
It's so much better than just being part of a machine, because even in my freelance, I do a lot of car writing, automobiles, and even with the publications that I work with, I always choose to work with people that I like, and it's never a bad decision when you do that. So I think that would be my answer to that question.
I'm unfamiliar as to how much conventions you've been invited to, but do you feel that people seem to be more interested on Canadian soil, or is it like a thing more in the exterior where people are digging this and they get to discover something?
Well, we haven't, because of COVID made things really difficult from a convention perspective. Joe attends a lot of conventions, typically, most of them in the United States. That's where, San Diego, Hawaii, those are the cons that he's most often invited to, because, Transformers and Street Fighter are very popular, and his art style is very specific and in demand.
You're lucky, bro.
I'm beyond lucky to be working with him, to have him as co-creator on our books and to have his ideas in there. We've talked with the Montreal Con about doing things, but sometimes I really feel like an outsider in the con sense, because I didn't really go to them because, I came to comics later in life, and I've attended the Montreal Con a few times, but that's really the only one I've ever been to. So, but in terms of our audience,
if ever you need it, I'll hook you up, bro.
He's got a lifespan pass.
I'll hook you up.
That would be cool. I mean, it's something we've talked about doing. But in terms of our audience, I would say it's mostly American. Yeah, there are a lot of, which is great, because that means they're reading about Quebec. And just to go back to Code 45 again, when I was growing up, I really liked Daniel Bélanger as a musician, and lyrics to his songs are integral to Code 45. They're
awesome. No, now you're gonna make me listen to him while reading your books. Now
they're in almost every issue, and we spoke with Daniel's manager. We got permission to do it. We have the license to it. It was important for me to do that. And they're in French. They're in the original French. So what I love is the idea of someone in Texas or Arkansas or Washington opening the book, and they're encountering Quebecois music in the original language. And I hope one person goes onto Spotify and types in Daniel Bélanger and starts listening to those albums and understands more about us in a way that that goes past what I put on the page. So that having the audience be more international was great because of the way it's like a Trojan horse into Quebecois culture.
Yep.
You see, you're touching my third question I was going to ask.
Third and final question?
It's okay. I'm not going anywhere. So.
What do you think is missing in comic books now? What do you think? What would you add? I have an idea, but
that's deep.
What do you think is needed to implement and make it maybe more interesting or accessible to the masses?
Oh, it's tough. Like again, I'm not an expert, and it's anytime you comment on the comics industry at large, it makes people angry. So
oh really? Oh, fuck them.
I think that personally, I don't read a lot of single issues. I like to approach a narrative in larger chunks. Maybe that's just because growing up reading a lot of prose, you know, it kind of puts you into that. Yeah. We don't have a lot of serialization outside of comic books when you look at written media, visual media, you know, although you can argue that streaming television has trained us to be better about that, where we're able to split up a narrative. But I think that we're trapped in some ways in what we were talking about earlier, where you have a book that comes out once a month that costs $4.99, and it doesn't feel sustainable, either in terms of making a living wage for the people who are creating those books, or building an audience of people who are outside of comic book stores, because comic book stores are super important to the business, but they can't be responsible for supporting its entire weight. And I think there needs to be a way for comics to, like in France, push out into the mainstream so that it's just normal that you grab a comic book when you're at a supermarket, when you're at a bookstore, when you're at, you know, the mall or something.
I used to do that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You go to a grocery store at a dépanneur and get like the comic book shelves that you turn around in metal, and you could grab any kind of comics and discover them. And
so I want exactly, but I want something like that. But it's comics plus it's trades, you know, plus it's collected versions, plus it's manga. You know, I remember you used to be able to go to, I mean, I sound old, but you go to the Pharmaprix and you would get like an Archie double digest that was like this big for $5, $6, whatever it is. If today that has to be $10 or $15, I still think there's a market for that. I think, and especially if you get kids reading manga, they become adults who read manga because it's the same thing. It's the same format with different topics, different subjects. And this is what Japan and France have that we don't have here, is like a pipeline for people who love comics as kids to keep loving them as adults in a different way. Because now if you're a kid and you love superheroes, you can still read about superheroes as an adult, but it's the same kind of thing. It's still single issues. It's still once a month. That evolution, I think that would be beneficial to everybody if there was a way to capture that energy and just broaden it. And I think that part of that is going to have to be prices going up so that the people who are creating the books, you know, aren't dying of a heart attack at 51, hunched over their drawing board, desk. Which is what's happening in comics. It's crazy.
You want to hear my idea?
Yes.
Here's what I would do. I'll take this because it's open. This is a comic book, right? I would have, let's say this one, and I would have a QR code here that when you're reading that part, it associates with a song to help set the mood of what you're reading now, to have a better understanding of what the author had in mind while he was writing.
So like a mixed media.
Exactly. So you have your QR, you click it, the song starts. Let's say it's a 2-minute, 3-minute songs. So you have like that 3 minutes to really say, okay, man, I'm going to take my time, savor it a bit more. Page 1, page 4, oh, there's a new, okay, what's the next song? Oh, it's a Daniel Bélanger song. All right, so we can really listen to the song. Obviously, I'm more of a non-lyrical person. I'd rather listen to music with no lyrics. I would add that in comics.
So it gives you context. It gives you additional context to what you're reading. When we did all of our books, we always do playlists for them, and especially now because the book is about, you know, university radio. So technically, that's the playlists and the genres are very important. So we've been associating them with different characters. So we want to have that music. But I've actually seen a few books where they didn't have a QR code, but they did have page by page, they would have music written into the margins where you could be kind of in touch with what they have.
Really?
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea. I think anything that pushes the medium into a new place is a good idea, you know, because you're going to find somebody who appreciates it.
I think so. There's a lot of us on this planet. I think there's more than 4 people that can appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
the biggest part is to get introduced to these people. As soon as they discover you, if you're good, they'll follow and they'll keep on.
It's very true.
Your stuff.
Discoverability is the hardest thing in any kind of medium. Yeah, and that's what I like about Kickstarter. The platform that we use to crowdfund our comics is there's so many different comics out there. I actually read a lot of creator-owned Kickstarter comics these days, probably about as much as I read going to the store and buying comics off the shelves, because it's a way for me to find stories that aren't being told anywhere else, which is kind of the stories that I want to tell too. You know, like I was saying, no one was writing about Montreal, so I did it. And I think that you can apply that to all of these people who are crowdfunding their comics. They had an idea that they didn't see anywhere else and that they felt was important enough to get out there. And so they did it, and you can get it from them directly. And I think that's really powerful. And I feel like that is kind of a third front for comics that is going to become more and more important and large as time goes on, being able to purchase directly from the creators, being able to fund their specific dreams and not having that layer of publishing in the way. And I think that partnering with publishers to get the audience that's in bookstores, to get the audience that's in LCSs is still important as well. But I just think it's a multi-pronged approach. You know, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
I honestly think that in the 10 next years, we're going to see a shift where it's going to be harder to just publish books, and everything is going to be pre-counted. All right, how many people are really interested in this? Perfect. We need to rack up the numbers, and we're going to print that exact amount of people,
that is
people
already
that are interested.
In some ways, that's already happening. So right now, again, not an expert, but in publishing in general, comic books or whatever, so many books are coming out that publishers don't promote them. So they will release 20 books in a month, and then they rely on the authors and the teams that created them, the creative teams, to do all of the promotion for them. And it creates a situation where the publisher isn't necessarily supporting the writers or the comic book artists or the colorists anymore. And when you get into that situation, why are they involved? That's what you have to ask yourself. You know, why are you partnering with these people? If they can bring something to the table that is going to help you get your book in front of more people, that's important. But if they're just distributing your book and that's it, that's something you can probably do yourself. And it's been especially a problem for, I think, literary prose like fiction, where a lot of writers, it just gets shot out of a cannon, and then you never hear from them.
Let's see what sticks to the wall.
Yeah, you have to bring the audience.
Merci beaucoup. I really had a kick. I could keep on talking for like another 2 hours, but I know that
we gotta let you go because you got other stuff to talk.
We have a deadline, right?
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
We do pluckety plug. Tell me your shit.
Sure.
Let me know where people can find you.
Sure. You've got the Kickstarter on the bottom of the screen. I appreciate that. If you go to deadaircomic.com, it will take you to that Kickstarter. It will take you to whatever the latest way to get Dead Air is. If you go to code-45.com, you'll be taken to a page that tells you all about the book. We have a little podcast series about the book, a video trailer, and the making of it. You can find that out. Yeah. And if you go to if you go to benjaminhunting.com, that's all my thoughts, my professional writing in other industries. And those are the 3 ways to find us. You have the Instagram on the bottom of the screen. Angela does a great job of keeping that up to date with the latest art that's going on from Joe and from her. So, and also wanted to shout out on Dead Air. I know I talked about Josh as our colorist on Code 45, but we're also working with Mayo Apechik and Reed Hinckley Barnes. That's the colorist and the letterer for Dead Air, and they're doing fantastic work, especially Maya's ability to kind of evoke the 90s colors that we're looking for. It's been really great.
I'm really happy that, well, first off, Dave Harris, I'm really happy that you presented to me, Mr. Benjamin.
Dave's a great guy.
I got to spend time with your friend. Sucks to be you, Dave. Whenever you want, bro, you're invited back. You want to talk shop, you want to talk comic books, you have a new project, please let us know.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
More than happy to talk comic
Merci
books.
beaucoup, Benjamin. Thank you.
Allez, bonne journée.
Really cool.
Thanks, have a nice day. Bye.
All right. Have a good one. Take care. Bon, messieurs, wow! Ça a été une excellente entrevue. Benjamin a été un excellent invité. J'y ai appris énormément. Et pour les gens qui ne parlent pas anglais, sucks to be you.
Sucks to be you, Westy. T'as eu le temps. T'as eu le temps de l'apprendre.
Non, c'est un très, très bon collaborateur pour l'entrevue. Le gars, il avait l'air à l'aise au bout. Ça a super bien été. J'ai adoré ça. Vraiment, vraiment cool.
Moi, j'ai pensé à toi tout le long parce que je me rappelle... Oh, t'as coupé. Je me rappelle... Là, c'est quoi, c'est en 97? T'étais à Orlando? C'était quand?
Ouais, fin des années 90.
Ouais, c'est ça. Anyway, je me rappelle...
Oui, mais moi, mais tu sais, c'est comme...
Mais c'est quelque chose que tu avais dit à un moment donné, puis je me rappelle, tu as dit, si tu veux travailler dans le domaine, il faut que tu sois capable de passer 10 heures par jour sur ta table à dessin.
Ah, faut que tu vives là-dedans, t'as pas le choix.
Ouais, c'est ça.
Mais lui, il est scénariste, il est écrivain, c'est autre chose. Puis après ça,
il passe plus que 10 heures.
C'est ça, parce que lui, il crée carrément le texte.
Ouais.
Tandis qu'après ça, tu as le penciler qui, lui, va essayer de comprendre ce qui a été écrit et de le visualiser. Puis à la fin, tu as le inker qui, lui, va peaufiner tout ça pour clarifier l'image.
Mettre le 3D.
Plusieurs étapes.